Massive buyouts, NIL budgets under stress, Clemson caught in the middle. We'll talk about it right here on Locked on Clemson.
You are Locked on Clemson, your daily podcast on the Clemson Tigers. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Tiger fans? Morgan Thomas here, Clemson fan, Clemson grad, host and producer of Locked on Clemson, part-time host and producer over on 105.5 FM, The Roar, the Clemson flagship station. Thank you so much for making Locked on Clemson your first listen of the day. We're part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day, and a big salute out there to the everydayers for hanging with us Monday through Friday. Every single week, you get exclusive Clemson content right here on the podcast or YouTube. And if you're new to the show, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. If you like the video or the podcast, I know you will. So go ahead and hit it because I know I'm going to go ahead and give you that guarantee. You're going to like it. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. We have a Brian Kelly problem, but we have a buyout problem. We have an NIL problem. We have stress. College football is supposed to be fun, but this season has been anything but that for not just Clemson, but many teams out there. And what should Clemson do to separate itself? Should it even separate itself? Clemson's caught in the middle, and nobody really knows what is going to fix anything because there's no proven answer to any of this chaos that is going on. And that is a big problem. There's nothing to really separate Clemson from the noise or what the right answer is from the noise. And Clemson trying to work their way through it. We have some ideas on how they should work their way through it. But again, nothing is proven. Programs, even those of teams like LSU and Brian Kelly, or former LSU head coach Brian Kelly, teams that have beaten Clemson are still out there moving forward 5 weeks later, 6 weeks later, firing their coach. This amount of just writing checks in the millions, tens of millions, $50 million to get rid of a coach, to have them not help out your university, to dump them with no real idea of what you're going to do next and how you're going to recover from it. And then continuing to ask fans to keep buying tickets, keep increasing their donations, keep moving up the ladder, and keep giving. You know, to me, sometimes I think to myself, maybe being still is the right answer to the Brian Kelly type problem that we're having in college football. Everybody wants to tell me, Morgan, we just need more transfer portal players. Well, LSU was the number one transfer portal team, and they've just fired their coach. So winning the transfer portal war doesn't guarantee you anything. Now, you could say they beat Clemson, but what does that really matter? In the grand scheme of things, they're in now, even though they have a win over the Tigers, in more shambles after a blowout loss at home, in more shambles than Clemson is at this point. They have no head coach and no idea what they're going to do in the future. And they've fired multiple head coaches over the last few years. Even a head coach in Brian Kelly, who was like 20-1 going into that game against Texas A&M. He was successful at home. All of this is just going to get worse and worse and worse. You don't want to jump into the swimming pool of everyone firing all their coach and having be on the hook for all of these big money deals and contracts that are out there. The worst thing that Clemson can do is to get in. They're already struggling to compete, as we can agree, right? The worst thing they can do is to get into a war competing with teams along the lines of firing your coach and paying buyouts. You don't want to be in that battle of who has the worst buyout. That would also be another losing case for Clemson. Clemson needs to avoid and get away from this idea that dumping Dabo Swinney and paying a huge buyout is the best option for them, because that's what everybody else is doing. They're not allowing their coaches to finish the season out. They're giving them big contract extensions and then almost immediately firing them after, quote, a bad season. I think that that's the one rat race you don't want to be involved in. Maybe you want to use the transfer portal more. Maybe, sure, yeah. 3 transfer portal guys, and those 3 guys have been bright spots for Clemson. Clemson could probably have been a better team this year with 10. Maybe not 40, but 10 would have been probably better for Clemson. Looking back, 2020, hindsight's 2020, right? There is no scenario where firing your coach, completely wiping the slate clean, in my opinion, is going to make your university, your program, better off, especially after a 17-year coach. You want the transition from Dabo Swinney to someone else to be as least drama-filled as possible, to be more of a passing of the guard a la Nick Saban. You know, he quickly stepped out, but he stepped out maybe on a good foot. Dabo still has opportunities for that as long as he has still more seasons to go. And Dabo still has opportunities to fix and right his wrongs. But as schools are in here struggling with their budget already, and Clemson's not out of that realm either. From what I hear from the inner workings and from my sources is that Clemson's budget's not beautiful either. You know, we're asking for these universities who are already in a budget crunch to then turn around and have to dump $50 million into a coach that's not going to even coach for them anymore. Has it helped LSU? No. Dumping all that money, we don't know what they're going to do next. Has it helped Florida State? No. You know, I mean, of all the teams out there that are seemingly year over year successful, they're the ones that are having the least amount of drama. You don't hear a ton of drama from Ohio State, just money into the program. You don't hear a bunch of drama from Oregon, money into the program. Georgia, not a ton of drama, money into the program. So if I'm Clemson, I let everybody else around me have the Brian Kelly problem. I let them all fire their coach. I champion the other teams, our competitors, to fire their coach. You know, fire your coach now, get rid of them, and pay that big buyout, because the less money you have to spend on talent, the more money Clemson can spend on it, you know, or at least maybe not the more money Clemson can, but at least Clemson has an advantage there because you can't compete with Clemson now. So that's what I'm thinking is, and don't be shocked if all that money that they need to raise rolls downhill to the fans ultimately, right? That have to foot the bill. That's the main way that they're going to be able to pay for it. Increase those ticket costs, increase those concession costs, increase those merchandise costs, parking, season ticket holder buy-ins, all that. You want to increase all those things. You already hate all the prices of those things now. Just go ahead and fire your coach and owe him 50, 60 million, right? It's going to be even worse. College coaching contracts are like probably one of the best for that coach, but one of the worst for the university that is tied to it. You know, another thing too is if you're one of those persons that says we got to get rid of Dabo Swinney, one, you don't want to be cash strapped, money poor in a market now where you have to pay players. You don't want to be in that scenario. Two, you don't want to be in a competitive disadvantage having to fight over the available coaches that are out there with all these other openings. It's not a good time to get in a coaching race because there's so many Power 4 job openings right now. It's not a good time to get into a buyout your coach race because you need that money for other things. I say we need to sit back, keep Dabo around. Don't pay a huge buyout for a likable coach and let everybody else fire all their jerks, butthole coaches out there. Let everybody else fire all those guys that are at the sorority house or doing scandalous things. You know, let everybody else fire those coaches while we sit here and we sit on our money and we save it and we invest it into the players, invest it into the university, invest it in the facilities, whatever you need to be. But you're not having to spend it on a coach that's not even coaching for you. I say Clemson needs to be quiet and let all this stuff happen. Let all the chaos around them happen. And who better to lead the way than a coach who has no drama? Dabo's not in the sorority house. He's not Ed Orgeron with his shirt off. Dabo's not Lane Kiffin getting in Twitter wars with media personalities. Dabo's not Shane Beamer crying over everything. Dabo's not Urban Meyer at the bar. Dabo's not Steve Sarkisian at the AA meeting. Dabo really, when we look at the problems that he brings to the table, he brings problems to the table. Everybody does. But they're pretty minor compared to a lot of the problems that other teams are having to deal with or pay to not deal with. Hey, we'll talk about some more things about specifically that talent acquisition thing that I was talking about on segment 2 on Locked on Clemson. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. And let's be real, actually getting tickets can feel more like a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. I pulled up Game Time today, and in just a few taps, I found a bunch of great deals for the Panthers-Rams coming up next weekend. Your favorite college football teams as well. I'm looking at stuff from $49 all the way down to as low as $25. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Wanted to get into discussion on Clemson and what I truly believe will be the big fix. You know, I've kind of been a big champion about the fact that staff to me really doesn't move the needle as quickly as getting new players in. Sure, firing a coordinator and getting a whole brand new offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator is going to flip the script. And they need to fit the style that you're looking for. Does Garrett Riley fit that style? I don't think he doesn't. Does Garrett Riley's game plan work for today's college football? It should, but it just hasn't fit so far. But if you change out an offensive coordinator, you can make some big strides or maybe not. You know, it's still kind of 50-50 on what will work. A coordinator themselves and a position coach themselves cannot add speed to the team. They cannot convert on a third down. They cannot get a long third down. They cannot get multiple first downs. They can't get turnovers. The biggest thing that a position coach can do for me in the college realm is continue to pound that high school recruiting level. So that's number one for me is can those guys resonate with the players that are younger than them and bring them in and get them to buy into, you know, what you're trying to do at your university. So that's step one. And Clemson, unfortunately, has a couple of position coaches that haven't really proven that they can do that. You know, CJ Spiller being one of them. I've got his jersey signed behind me, and he's my favorite player growing up. So CJ Spiller is one that not necessarily doing that well in the recruiting world. And so that's a big concern for me. I would overlook inexperience if you're a great salesperson for the university. You would think that CJ Spiller could be that, but sometimes being a great player, a Hall of Fame player, a Ring of Honor player, those are great things, but you don't necessarily connect with the youth, with today's youth. And so if it goes multiple years and there's really no improvement, I think there's some things that need to be done differently. I could say that about multiple places on the Clemson staff, but that's still not going to fix Clemson immediately. If you bring in another running back coach, they're not going to like hit the ground running and start landing a bunch of recruits immediately, unless they're already plugged in at another local school, which that might be the better option. Someone who has more experience at a local school or a school in the Southeast, that's already plugged in and been recruiting actually like maybe even recruiting against Clemson, right? So maybe there's some opportunity there. And if you move, you could bring someone in with the transfer portal that was originally their commit or originally their player, right? So you could have opportunities for immediate moves with the transfer portal. But to me, I don't necessarily think that the position coach should get all the blame, or even the offensive coordinator should get all the blame, or it's the major fix. Again, I can understand where you have this whole laundry list of all these friends and family that Dabo Swinney has added to the staff, and it is concerning. But the problem is that he earned the right to kind of call the shots because he won 2 national championships, and now we're mad that he's calling the shots. I guess the biggest thing is, it is disappointing that Dabo would go almost 100% friends and family, to a point where he had to back off of that and stop, and replace former players. And he's going to have to continue to do that as well. I don't think that's a good way of running a football team, is to just continue to bring in only people that grew up through your program. To me, I would guess to say that there are a lot of yes Dabo people in that locker room, in that office, and that to me is not good long term. Dabo needs to have people that can say, hey, I don't really agree with this. I don't really think that this is a good way of doing this. And former players that grew up under him, probably not the best to now turn around and be honest with him. There is a level. I'm not saying that they're dishonest, but they're probably not. They're probably holding back a lot of some of their real thoughts, if they do have them, if they have them at all. But again, to me, Clemson has to identify where their positional gaps are. We know if you look at this year, they should have brought in a couple of new guys for the offensive line. They refused. That was a huge failure. They tried, they dabbled, and then it didn't work, and then they gave up on it. That's a huge failure there. They didn't bring anybody in the running back room. That after multiple years of CJ not bringing in a top running back, and they're not using Easy Omume, CJ's only offer, they're not using Gideon Davidson, the best running back they've had since Maffa and Shipley. Those are big failures there in that position group. You could look at the defensive line. They kind of had a little bit of a gap in the safety. Now we're seeing there's a little bit of a gap in the linebacker room, with Wes Goodwin, and so there's a little bit of a fall off there that was allowed for 1 or 2 years in a row, and now it's caught up to Clemson. That's basically what I see it. A plan that works for 2025. I don't know if any way you could fix 2025. You just got to get your best players out there that are going to still want to play 100%. If there's anybody that wants to pretend that they're injured for a long period of time or just checking out, just sit them on the bench. Clemson could easily lose more games. I'd rather have guys on the field that want to be there through all of this. And then for 2026, to me, burn it all down is not a great solution. As I mentioned, segment 1, the best solution is to stick with Dabo long term. He's not a play caller, and he's shown that he can make adjustments. Now they're slower than what we would like, but now it's the time to press him and say, hey, you know what? The transfer portal has to be used significantly. And, your coaching staff can't just be a bunch of former players that have no experience, and any of them on the coaching staff have got to go, or they've got to move to a developmental role, like an analyst role, for a few years, or they need to go to a smaller school and earn their wings, and earn their ability to gain that trust, or they need to go to another school and just learn how to recruit against Clemson. If anything, that to me would be what Clemson can do. We've seen you can turn a team around quickly in college football just by using the transfer portal properly. Just 2 years ago, Indiana was no good, and now they're one of the best teams in the country. Just a few years ago, Texas A&M was struggling to actually be a powerhouse, and now they're a powerhouse. Now they're one of the best teams in the country. So there are ways to do it and be able to get back to the top. Look at Vanderbilt. Just a few years ago, a nobody in college football. Now a powerhouse, or at least a solid fighter that you cannot guarantee a win against. So it's not easy, but it's more common than ever that you can refresh a team in 1 year. That's why I say stick with Dabo. Don't get into some big deficit paying some sort of buyout. And you're already in a league that doesn't make as much money. So stick with Dabo. Press him to make the changes that need to be made. But the biggest thing is bring more talent on the field, because I've told you this a million times. You can hit a ground ball 1,000 times to the shortstop, but when it's bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, and the ball comes to them, it's up to them to make that play. It's not the position coach that is at fault at that point. All right, hey, we're going to finish up the show talking about some more bad news. Clemson loses another recruit for the 2026 recruiting cycle. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, for the NBA Finals winner, they got plus 210 for the Oklahoma City Thunder, plus 650 for the Denver Nuggets, plus 650 for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So get in on that. Check that out over on FanDuel.com. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head over to FanDuel.com, sign up, play your game with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Four-star safety Blake Stewart decommits from Clemson today. Is this a big problem? Is this a warning for the future? The second decommitment in the class. Some fans are going to be on the sky is falling. Some fans are going to be on the this is just normal. He just pledged like a month previously on September 30th. Miami's been on him and reportedly hosted him quietly. He joins defensive end Dre Quinn as the second decommitment in the cycle. Clemson, though, didn't seem to be hurt too much because they're still in the top 15 class-wise, but must continue to defend the players that it's on their board currently. Now, what does this mean for Clemson? Well, on the field struggles this season are definitely bleeding into recruiting. Other teams in the ACC are feasting not only on the field, but in the recruiting world. Clemson could not avoid, having a bad season like this and also keeping players at the same time. Although they're still getting a lot of reaffirmed commitments out there, there could be many more losses on this schedule. And so you still have that to hold your breath point of it. Now, safeties and edges, which is what Clemson has lost, are premium spots that, other teams are going to want to raid after. And that's a big problem for Clemson because that's two of the spots that you'd like to have as much depth as possible, as we're seeing the problems with that at Clemson now. But the biggest thing is, how do you counter any of this? I don't think you do much in the recruiting world to counter these things. I would rather not Clemson go get their next choice, because typically what we've seen is their next choice can't compete, can't live up to the ACC level billing. And so Dabo tapping into some sort of high school player that's further down his list or further down the position coach's list has typically been a disaster for Clemson. So I don't want that at all. Travis Etienne and Hunter Renfrow have spoiled Clemson staff into thinking that they can keep getting diamonds in the rough. And these, lower 3-star guys that they keep going after guys leave have ended up really not being able to rise to the occasion and get developed or improve. So what I would say is stick with what you got. Try to keep reaffirming those guys that you have. Keep, letting them know that you want to build with them. But the big counter move for me is in January in that transfer portal market. Keep freeing up things. Now, these two guys, both according to 24/7 Sports, were 3-star guys. I'm not ready. I'm not really interested in experiments. I don't know I really hadn't looked at a lot of film on these guys. As you know, I'm kind of have a disdain for recruiting at this point. But I believe that recruiting is really just getting guys that want to be there, the best guys you can that want to be there, winning some in-state battles when you can, winning some pipeline state battles when you can. And anytime you can't get the guy you wanted, or even the second choice you wanted, maybe even the third choice you wanted, I say just give up at that point and go straight to the transfer portal and get somebody else. To me, that's what the immediate response plan should be for anybody that is going to, especially a guy like this, that's just going to commit and then a month later decommit. Maybe there's some other guys that are on the board that Clemson has a relationship with. That could be something that they could kind of pursue now, but Clemson's going to definitely have to go into the transfer portal for 2026. I'd rather have somebody who's coming in 2026 and more ready. It would be better to have somebody ready than to have somebody just sitting there filling in a void or being the 4th string guy that's not going to get any time at all. NIL has proven that you can bring in better players with the right amount of money. One thing I will say about 2026, and I may make another podcast about it. I'm not really looking or begging for Clemson to get a high-profile quarterback. Clemson is not in a major market. Clemson's not in a large alumni base or a very wealthy, extremely wealthy alumni base. They are behind in many of those areas, and also with proximity have a lot of competition with other schools with where they're located. And they share, home with another team in the same state. So what I will say is Clemson's got to be very calculated with the money that they spend. I don't like Dabo's strategy of just giving the majority of the money to current players, because those guys haven't returned the favor with performance on the field. What I would say is the first fruits, as Dabo would probably be understanding of, considering he's a Christian, it's time to give the first fruits to some fresh new faces and new talent, not your leftovers. You don't want to give all of your first fruits to the current guys that are average or just slightly above average and hope that they get better. I want to take a little bit off the top and not just the leftover money and give it to some new faces. I want to give starting out to some new faces to really see what Clemson can do if they engage in the player markets that are out there. How much of this is going to impact Clemson long term? Well, if Clemson sticks with their current strategy of just keep over recruiting from high school, well, we know that that's just not really working. It's not providing you an immediate impact like the transfer portal would. In past, Dabo would maybe miss out on a defensive end and a second and a safety, a defensive end and a safety. Then he would replace them with a 2027 defensive end and safety. Well, the problem, as we can see with that, is that now you're another year behind, and those guys are not going to be ready even in 2027. So you're 2 years behind now. So Clemson's got to be a little bit more aggressive on the transfer portal, take their hits on the chin in some of these cases because of the poor performance for 2025. I don't think the world's fallen apart because Clemson gets decommits. It's unfortunate that that's where Clemson is now, right now. But as again, we've seen, teams can rebound quickly and change quickly if they engage in the transfer portal market aggressively and appropriately in the positions they need to. All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for making Locked On Clemson your first listen of the day. Go check out Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs, Alex Dono break down the most interesting conference in college sports, from the rivalries to the championships to every game in between. Find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. I'll see you tomorrow, Tiger fans. We'll continue to dive into what Clemson can do to rebound and also get looking at what Clemson needs to do to win this game against Duke right here on Locked On Clemson. And as always, Tiger fans, we'll see you tomorrow, and we'll see you at the top of the hill.